Rookie drafts are well under the way. We have our draft capital all confirmed, and we're starting to get an idea of our ADP as our draft shake out. So, what better time to get Rich Cooling, Dynasty Island over on X of the Fantasy Sanctuary on board to do a rookie mock draft? We're going to have Superflex and tight end premium Rich, and we're just going to go back and forth. We are without Ed, so we may as well get stuck straight in. Would you like the 101 or shall I take the honour?
I'll leave it to you. You can take the 101.
Well, I'm going to go for an absolute mega shock for the 101. I'm going to set in. I'll go to rookie zone, so I don't put Jamar Chase in there. Obviously, Mr. Ashton Jeanty is going in there as the 101. Have you had any drafts yet where he has not been the 101, Rich?
I've had two, but both of them are slightly weird scoring. One's a 16-team Superflex, so obviously quarterbacks are incredibly sought after. And one is one where it's basically insane tight end premium. It's 2 points because it's a full point premium and then a point for first downs. So Colston Loveland was the 101 in that league.
So those normal structures then we're seeing him still in. Obviously, it makes perfect sense in those situations for him to drop somewhat. Where do we see him finishing the season, kind of for fantasy in general? Where do you see his finish point? And if he isn't a grand slam that we all think he's going to be, what's his floor?
I think his ceiling's sky high, and I think his floor is sky high. I think I would expect him to be a top 6 running back in redraft. I think he's going to finish as a top 6 running back in redraft. I think his ceiling is running back 1 overall. Like, this guy is a true stud, 99th percentile prospect in my model. The guys that he's in the same tier as in terms of my prospect model is, Saquon Barkley, Todd Gurley, Bijan Robinson. Like, we're talking truly, truly elite tier.
I think I've heard of all of those players. Yeah, they did all right, didn't they?
Pretty good, yeah. So yeah, I think this guy's incredible. I don't love the offensive line that the Raiders have got. I'll be honest. I think they've got 3 question marks, but I think he's good enough to produce both in terms of his ability to force missed tackles, but also in the receiving game. He should be an absolute dynamite addition to any Dynasty roster.
And this is the time there, isn't it, where we've got ages to wait, but it's going to be so exciting to see how he performs and watch. We've seen the highlight reels of college. Start to put those NFL highlight reels of him together as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a guy that doesn't like running backs in Dynasty, doesn't value running backs in Dynasty. So for me to have him as my 101, how highly that speaks of him as a prospect. So yeah, I'm very excited about what he could be.
Who are you going to pick for the 102 though?
So given it's Superflex, I've got a kind of a tier of 3 or 4 guys here, but given it's Superflex, we obviously don't have roster needs, but I'll go Cam Ward. I think he's just a really good NFL quarterback. Like, I think for fantasy, he's going to come in and be that back-end QB1, high-end QB2 for several years. Feels like we don't talk about him at all as a prospect. Feels like, the NFL hasn't really talked about him as a prospect because everybody knows he's gone 101 in the NFL draft for 3-4 months, and it just feels like he's the most underwhelming 101 I can remember in a long time. But yeah, I love his pocket ability. I love the arm talent, and by that I don't mean arm strength. His ability to change his release angles, move his arm, and kind of throw from different footwork and different areas. I think he's a really intriguing prospect, and I think he's landed in a really solid situation. Like, yeah, the Titans don't have many superstars, but if you look at what they've done this offseason, they've filled all of those holes, and there's no massive question marks really across the board.
And I think for our rookie draft as well, what he's got counting, so as far as his rookie draft stock goes, there's not really anyone pushing him in the conversation, is there? Because of landing spots, because of the caliber of other quarterbacks that have been drafted this year. If you don't take Cam Ward, you're waiting a little while on the next quarterback drafting opportunity, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a 1 quarterback draft for me. I may be giving it away here, Pistol, but yeah, I wouldn't be taking any other quarterbacks in the first round at the moment.
Next up, then, I am going to be going for. Let me just remove that off there. I'm going to have a look for my the third pick of the draft. This is where that kind of tier break. I'm looking at the 3 players that I'm happy to go for here, but there is one who is my preference, one I've not managed to get hold of anyway yet in rookie drafts either, and that is Amarian Hampton of the Chargers. Love the fit. Obviously landed in that Greg Roman offense alongside John Harbaugh as well. It just works as a perfect combination for him. Expect him to overthrow Najee Harris by the end of 2025. I think if you're taking him in redraft, as we get into redraft season, there's maybe going to be a little bit of worry potentially September, October, as everyone starts to have that. Oh, it's not done exactly what I wanted straight away. I can see this paying off big time by the time we get to the business end of the fantasy season into playoffs. And it just looks good for years to come, potentially, doesn't it? Well, years to come as far as a running back goes, but it's looking good if you get to pick him up in your rookie drafts and you're set a running back for a little while, aren't you?
Yeah, I think he's a great prospect. I think because of people drooling over Ashton Jeanty, Amarian Hampton's kind of the forgotten guy, but I think he's a really impressive prospect. Love the scheme he's landed in. I think he's got 3 down versatility. If you're worried about, Najee Harris, I think you're doing it wrong. And yeah, I love him. I think he's going to be a really intriguing player. And I think that he's a player I'm excited to have on my rosters, whether that's redraft or dynasty, because I think when it matters, once we get into money making season, I think he's going to be a 60+% opportunity share guy week in, week out.
Who are you selecting at the 104, Rich?
So I will go ahead and grab Ted McMillan. Not the sexiest, not the most appealing wide receiver prospect we've had in the past few years. Don't think he's got that, wide receiver 1 overall upside, but love the fit, love the landing spot, particularly love the draft capital. I just think he's a really impressive guy, that he's someone that's going to step into the NFL and I completely understand how he's going to be used. We're going to see a heavy amount of those kind of in-breaking routes where he can use his foot speed, his size, his catch radius. He's not just going to be a kind of outside the numbers downfield threat. And I'm really excited about him and getting to see him week in, week out, because I think he could be a 120 plus target guy as a rookie, which, if you're getting that with the 104 in your rookie drafts, a guy that could potentially be a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 immediately, that's very interesting.
Yeah, he looks like to me going with the clear alpha going into Carolina, and he seems to be the perfect pairing for Bryce Young as well, doesn't he? We've seen Bryce Young start to kick on last season. That's always going to have a lot to do with this fit here, but Bryce Young in Ted McMillan has the perfect way for him to step up and kick on again year 3, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I've always been a bit of a Bryce Young believer, and I'm continuing to ride that bandwagon because, yeah, I think this, as you said, is a perfect fit for his skill set, his talents in terms of, highly accurate, but can then create those plays out of structure when things break down. And I think him and Tet should form a really nice combination.
There are 2 players I am considering at the 105. But I'm going to stick by the principle that I've gone through all the way so far through the offseason so far, and that is a player that I absolutely adore. So I'm going to go with Travion Henderson at the 105. Just going into that Vrabel McDaniel system, who Daniel's got that solid track record of getting the best out of pass catching running backs as well. It just looks like he's going to be destined to have a really good relationship with Drake May. I think he's the exact sort of player that's going to really help Drake May as well. It's got the fantasy cheat code, though. We have a running back who will thrive in PPR situation for fantasy, and I just can't turn that down at the 105, even though we have that unicorn waiting just around the corner to be picked up at some point soon, I am sure. How high are you on Henderson? Are you worried? I think I know the answer to this. Are you worried at all about Ramondre Stevenson?
A little bit. I think I'm someone that sits here and says that landing spots are irrelevant. So, I'm not overly concerned. I think he's a really impressive back. I love the explosive ability. I love the receiving work. I've got a slight concern that he's never going to be a true workhorse, and he's always going to be a 1A in an offense, which does knock him slightly, and why I have him a tier below the top 5 guys on my board. In terms of 100th percentile outcome, he's absolutely there. I think he's someone that you could say, best case scenario, if he gets a lead back role, he could be a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. I just worry that given the injuries, given the way that Ohio State used him and showed that they can get the best out of him when he's in the split backfield, I'm worried that he's always going to have that kind of bigger bodied guy that's going to take 10 to 12 carries off him a week, and just potentially limit that ceiling ever so slightly.
Which way do we turn for the 106?
So I'm going to shoot for upside. This is a guy that you could tell me you drafted him 101 and I wouldn't argue with it. Travis Hunter, I think he's got obscene potential. If we looked back in 3 years' time and he was the overall dynasty wide receiver 1, I wouldn't be shocked. I think he is that good and that talented. This is a guy that we're talking about as an elite wide receiver prospect, and never trained as a wide receiver, never sat in wide receiver classrooms in college, just was basically told the route to go and run, and went and ran it, and still, put up obscene numbers. This is a guy that's a 95th percentile prospect in my rookie model. I think he's elite. I think, as I said, the ceiling is higher than Ted McMillan and any other player in this draft, quite frankly. My concern is that we don't know how much he's going to play on offense. And I think that if you're willing to take that risk, then yeah, you can draft him higher. But for me, the 105 is where I would take him. And that's the point at which I'm comfortable. I think after those top 2 tiers of Jeanty and then those 3 guys after that, that's where I'm comfortable with the risk. But if you're chasing upside, if you're shooting for the moon, as I said, I wouldn't argue with you if you took him with the 101.
Yeah, when you're looking at the probability of your outcomes, once you've got to this stage, I feel like you can make a case for taking everyone that we've taken above him here. But after this point, there isn't a case to be made that I'm comfortable listening to at that stage. I've seen him go as high as the 102 so far. I've seen him go as low as the 107. Around here, seems that 105, 106 point, I think is where we can see him go a lot of the time, unless we have some revolution news one way or the other as we get a little bit closer towards the start of the season. Loads of great content that we're going to be putting out over the course of the off-season, though. So please do subscribe, like, and share. Head over either on YouTube or your podcast app of choice. We're also on TikTok these days too. And then once you're over at YouTube, make sure you do subscribe to the Fantasy Sanctuary, the rookie guide that was our pre-draft oracle that we made a lot of use of. Rich, it's been updated post-draft, hasn't it now as well?
Yeah, so it's fully out. It's been released to all of our members. So yeah, 90 film-based player profiles, plus all the stats and information you need for all of those. As I said, my rookie model going back to 2003. Every prospect that's either been drafted or attended the combine, plus all of my ranks and riskometer, all sorts of different write-ups and everything in there. Everything you could ever need to know about any fantasy relevant rookie is indeed in that rookie guide.
And how can people get a copy of that, Rich?
Sign up as a member, go across to the Fantasy Sanctuary YouTube channel, hit the join button if you're on a laptop, or indeed if you just want to buy a copy. It's now available on Amazon, on Kindle only, or indeed you can drop me a DM on Twitter and I can sort you a link to buy one.
Amazing stuff. Looking at the 107 though, and I'm going to be going for Quinshon Judkins at this stage. We know that he's got the college production. We know that he's now got the draft capital, and we know he's got the opportunity to be the RB1 on his team. Do we know if the Browns can be trusted? That's the question mark for me. Overdue. You look at those probability, those outcomes. It's what's happening in that roster. It's what's happening on the offense. It's who of the 5 options are going to be at quarterback. Is that going to matter too much for a running back who is a bit of a battering ram on short yardage?
No, I think I said at the top, didn't I? To me, landing spots are irrelevant. I'm viewing draft capital, talent, and that's all that matters. Yeah, okay. For 2025, it may not be the best offense. It may not be the best, landing spots, but offenses, landing spots change so fast in the NFL. I don't think we're very good at understanding what is a good one. So, yeah, I don't love this offense, but if Shedeur Sanders comes out, wins that job, shows that he should have been a first-round pick, they reinvest in the offensive line next off season. I still think Stefanski is one of the best play callers in the league. This offense could suddenly look very, very different very quickly. So what's a bad landing spot for 2025 could be an incredible landing spot for 2026. So yeah, that's where I say I don't try to evaluate landing spot too heavily. I think the draft capital, the talent, his potential to be a 3-down back is tantalizing. So I think I would have taken him next pick if you hadn't grabbed him.
Next up, then, we're looking at the 108. With it being tight end premium, are you starting to consider a tight end, or have you got other positions you want to look at first?
No, exactly that. So I'd grab the tight end now. I'm going to go Colston Loveland with the 108. I just think he's an impressive prospect. This is a guy that, we'll talk about another tight end shortly, I'm sure. But this is a guy that I've got very few question marks about him transitioning to the NFL. I think he's going to be a perfect move tight end. I think he's got the potential to play the Y, line up in line. I think he lands with an offense that knows how to use movable tight ends and kind of get the best out of them. So I'm incredibly excited about Colston Loveland. The worst thing I can say is that he's got some competition for targets, but are we really that concerned? I'm quite happy drafting good players on good offenses. That's what we all dream about. And I believe Colston Loveland is going to be one of those guys.
Yeah, we've been spoiled for choice, really, with fancy tight ends over the last few years, and Loveland would seem to project to have a shout at continuing that as well. At this stage, I would probably usually wait to put the next tight end on board, but with it being tight end premium, and I would have gone Loveland first as well, but I'm going to pull the trigger on taking Tyler Warren straight away here. Now, you've said about seeing landing spot to be irrelevant. I'm taking that advice on board. I am not going to worry about Danny Dimes and Anthony Richardson, ultimately because it has been said, over the last couple of seasons, or both of them, they're going to struggle to hit a barn door at 10 yards. They're going to find out, because waiting potentially just 10 yards down is a player the size and with the wingspan of a barn door. If they can't hit him, then neither of them deserve a job moving on from this point onwards. So surely they're lacking skill sets in the pass game. It could be really beneficial for Tyler Warren for a fancy prospect, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think if you're just looking for positives and upside, then there's plenty to love about Tyler Warren. He's a freak with the ball in his hands. He's got prototypical size. He moves really well given that size. I've got some question marks over his route running ability. I don't think he's a very good blocker. And so I don't love elements of the game, shall we say. But yeah, as you said, tight end premium, if we're shooting for upside, is well worth a punt here.
Pick 10? Where are you
So
going?
it's going to be RJ Harvey for me. After Quinshon Judkins goes off the board, if I'm shooting for upside, RJ Harvey's the pick. I think, anytime Sean Payton kind of anoints a guy, goes and grabs him and then starts talking or waxing poetic about him, I'm always going to be intrigued. I think he's got incredible, rare ability with the ball in his hands and in open space. This is a guy that I tagged as my favorite prospect to watch in this year's draft, hoping that I'd be able to grab him with some second round picks. But Sean Payton put paid to that, shall we say, and kind of drafted him a little bit earlier than I thought he would go. But love the guy. I think he's fantastic in space and could be really intriguing in that offense, given Sean Payton's history with players like this that move like this.
And I think what's really telling from a fantasy perspective is anything you see Payton talking about him, he's talking about the pass catching ability. He's talking about how he's going to be used in that part of the game as well, isn't he? So yeah, it does certainly make it very... We were all saying who is going to be the running back going to Denver. I think there was lots of talk about Hampton, Henderson there. RJ Harvey's had a massive bump from that. But as you say, there's lots of people who were relatively high on him before that, put him into that landing spot. And that's why we're seeing him going far higher than people may well have projected pre-draft as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's any time he gets second round draft capital when we're projecting him as maybe a day 3 pick, he's going to jump up the board significantly, isn't he?
This next pick for me is the first time I'm thinking longer term with a selection, and that is Emeka Egbuka. So I see him having reasonable value at points over the course of the season. Obviously, we've got the question marks about Evans and Godwin. I mean, firstly, for a young wide receiver, what better wide receiver room to be in to learn your craft at NFL level in your rookie season than that? But Godwin, said we're all assuming when the contract came in, he must be all fit and healthy. We've not really heard anything to confirm that at this point. Is that just because there's no point spreading news about it, or is it because he's not going to be all fire and ready to go? Evans, I think for the last 3 years, I said I think we're about to start to see the downtick in production. He just keeps on getting those 1,000-yard seasons, but he's not going to go on forever. We know that as well. So Egbuka, I think, has got some time this season to really settle in, and throw into that the fact that Baker Mayfield is completely turned his fortunes around as a quarterback as well. Egbuka could well be the go-to target for Mayfield for the next 2, 3, 4 years, couldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking from an NFL perspective, I don't understand this pick. I hate this pick from the Bucks perspective because I think you're drafting a player whose best role, best kind of scenario is basically exactly what Chris Godwin's been doing for the last 4 years. So I don't see how they're both going to be able to work on the field at the same time in terms of they're both profile as that kind of power slot, but you're going to have to ask one of them to line up outside. So yeah, got some serious question marks there, but I keep saying landing spots are relevant. I think the talent, I think the draft capital, it's a good pick here, and it's where I think he needs to go, because I think if we're chasing that upside and chasing that potential, I think he's got as much as anyone in this sort of range. But for me, now heading to the 112, I have to say this is where I've already, there's a couple of points in the draft where I'd probably be looking to trade back. This is where I think there's probably 11 consensus guys. I think it tends to be. Maybe you could throw in Caleb Johnson or Jackson Dart. But the guys I'm looking to draft here, I know I can probably get the 203, 204. So I'm always looking to move back here. But I'm going to go and grab Jaden Higgins. I think, the Texans grabbing him where they did, I think his fit with CJ Stroud, that profile, that ability in the offense is really impressive. I think he's got better than we expect foot speed and route running ability. And I think his, talent on contested catches, not just, the big ones downfield outside the numbers, but also on in-breaking routes where he can use his body to create separation, is really impressive. So I think he's going to walk in. I think he's going to start as a rookie. And yeah, I'm really excited about him. And that's the reason why I'd take him over perhaps a few of the other names that you'd expect to probably fall here.
So the two names that I'm debating at this stage, you've mentioned both of just previously as well. At this stage, I'm thinking, do I start to stock up my taxi squad and put Jackson Dart on there straight away now? Or do I go for another player who's got a solid opportunity year one? And I'm going to go for that. I'm going to put in Caleb Johnson at this point. Looking at the opportunity, I mean, I'm still not quite sure what the faff has been in Pittsburgh. Well, other than the faff that Aaron Rodgers brings to any situation. It's obviously not quiet enough yet for him to decide to announce where he's going. He'll want to make sure the news cycle is completely on him for that, I am certain. But Pittsburgh are either going to have to pass to Metcalf or run it. And Johnson should be in for a solid workload because of that. I've been the Jaylen Warren fan club for fantasy for the last 2 or 3 years now. I'm out at this stage because Caleb Johnson is such a good back, and I think he spells the end for Warren in that situation. And Caleb Johnson could have a good run, and he could be a solid fantasy running back as well in the situation he's in.
Yeah, I wasn't the biggest Caleb Johnson fan through the pre-draft process. I had concerns about his receiving ability. I had concerns about how much he relied on that kind of zone running style, where he lands in a situation where he's probably not going to have to be a receiving back, and the Steelers run zone runs at one of the highest rates in the league. So yeah, it's an absolute perfect landing spot for him and what he does. For me, I'm going to go back to the wide receiver position. If you told me, I joked about this is the Bill Simmons Tyson zone for this project of, he said Mike Tyson entered a zone where you would believe any story about the player, about Mike Tyson and anything that anybody said. For me, that's Luther Burden in the fantasy world of anything that you told me about Luther Burden, where he finished as a rookie, where he was in 5 years' time, if he was out of the league in 2 years, if he was a top 12 dynasty wide receiver, like he's one of the most talented wide receivers we've seen come out of college. His ability with the ball in his hands is rare. His ability to separate when he's engaged is rare, but he's also a little bit of a head case. I don't know if he is a natural wide receiver. I don't know if he's going to be able to slot into an offense, or he's just going to rely on being a gadget player that's seeing manufactured touches and everything like that. I have absolutely no idea what he's going to be at the next level, how the offense is going to use him, what his potential outcomes are. But the upside is so tantalizing. I think this is the point at where I'm comfortable taking that risk, and I can go and grab Luther Burden and just pray that we get that 100th percentile outcome, and he's a fantasy superstar for my team.
I have never been happier to hear someone uncertain about a player, because Luther Burden, I've got 2 question marks next to his name. Well, after the third anyway, I've got those question marks. So I'm saying I don't really know necessarily, even when I'm completely happy taking him, and what we're going to get from him as well. So I'm a little bit relieved that you are also a little bit uncertain, Rich. And he's a player that at this stage, though, we've spoken about time and time again, that the probability of you picking a productive fantasy asset in the second round is so low. You may as well go for that upside with a player like Burden if it all lands and if it all comes off.
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about 10 to 15% chance that someone picked in this range is a reliable fantasy option. So we're talking 2 top 12 quarterback, 24 running back, 36 wide receiver, or 12 tight end seasons. That's shows you the chances of landing someone that's going to be a reliable contributor for your fantasy team at this point in the draft.
Next up, I am going to go quarterback. I am going to go Jackson Dart at this point. Obviously, he's going to be starting off on your taxi squad because he's not going to be plug and playing straight away. Are we hugely surprised that the Giants took another quarterback after already putting 2 players in that spot? And obviously, we know that this is going to be the resurgence of Mr. Wilson anyway this year. He's going to be back to being dangerous week in, week out. I just think Jackson Dart slotting into that situation, having the chance to sit and having the chance to kind of get NFL ready, is a risk I'm happy to take at this point in the draft. And leave, as far as taxi squad players, this is your best opportunity, I think, to have someone reliable. I think it's another quarterback who will have potentially the highest ceiling you might want to stash. But Jackson Dart is one that I'm quite interested to try to pick up here or there in Superflex, especially if I'm needy, if I'm thinking long-term with the rebuild as well. Am I being too optimistic still on Jackson Dart?
So I think that this may be the most moronic draft pick we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years. No, that's not saying you Giants, by the way. I think in a best case scenario, okay, the Giants have a good season. They're competitive, maybe borderline playoff contender. Russell Wilson or James Winston, whoever starts under center, plays well enough to keep Brian Daboll his job, enough that Jackson Dart sits on the sideline, learns, develops, and is potentially the starting quarterback in 2026 and beyond. That's a perfect scenario. Realistically, that's not happening, is it? Let's be honest. The Giants aren't going to be good enough. We know that Daboll's on the hot seat. We're going to get halfway through the year, and they know, Shane and Daboll know, that the only way they can keep their job is for Jackson Dart to be seen as the future franchise quarterback. So we're probably going to see Jackson start somewhere around like week 8, week 9, something like that. He's going to get pushed in. He's not ready. I think his processing ability is not there. I think his pocket presence isn't there. He's going to struggle. We're going to get Brian Daboll fired. We're going to bring in a new head coach, offensive coordinator, who's going to be given Jackson Dart, who's a raw tool, and basically said, try and be Jackson Dart. He's going to struggle for a year. They're going to say Jackson Dart's not someone I picked. I want to pick my own quarterback, and Jackson Dart's going to move on. The same as we've seen with Justin Fields and Will Levis, and name any drafted quarterback in recent years that have been in the same situation. You can name all of the Jets quarterbacks. That's what we're going to see. And I just think it's the likely outcome is that Jackson Dart is never a reliable fantasy option, because I don't think he's ever going to be a reliable starting quarterback in the NFL unless he's given the time to develop and round out his game. And I just don't think he's going to get that with the Giants being a first round pick. I think he's going to get forced in.
I think I've just been so. I think I've got to stage where I've just developed it as a character trait that I will defend Jackson Dart at this point. I'm not even entirely sure if I believe myself anymore, but I've been so invested this far. I need to stick by it just in case he does end up having any productivity, so I can say I'd seen it all along. I think I'm just being stubborn now, if I'm honest, Rich.
As I said, there is a scenario where he gets to sit this year. He's starting quarterback next year. Dable keeps his job, and I can see it. I think he could be great. I think he's got all the tools. I think he just needs, he's coming from an offense where he basically didn't ever have to process. He never called a snap count. Like, he's going to take some time. We can't just thrust him in and start him in the NFL. But yeah, that's what we're going to see, I reckon.
Next up, then.
So for me, I hit a bit of a tear break here. Given tight end premium, I could maybe think about going tight end. But I think I'm going to go with Jackson Dart's teammate in college. I'm going to go Trey Harris. Love the landing spot. Love the fit in that offense. I think he's exactly what the Chargers needed. I can already see him, being Mike Williams at his peak. Those contested catches down the field outside the numbers. And I'm really intrigued about him. I think if he ran a 4.4, I think we're talking about him as a top 20 wide receiver in the top 20 player in the draft. I think it's just that pure speed is the only reason why he fell. But I like the potential in this offense of him being that X, with Lab McConkey being the movable piece underneath.
Yeah, I think the fit with McConkey is just a great combination, and this is why Justin Herbert was on our show last week, one of our fantasy winners as well, because he's got it all before him now. Hopefully, for us to start to see the best from him from a fantasy point of view as well. Throwing Amar in Hampton, it's such a revitalized Chargers offense, and they're going to be really exciting to watch this year. After Harris, then, so I've got a couple of players that I'm thinking about here, but I'm going to go for a player that I'm not sold on at all, but at some point, Green Bay have got to get it right with a wide receiver. Will that be Matthew Golden or not? We know that he's fast. We know the Packers are a messy landscape for wide receivers. This feels like the right spot to take a gamble on a player like Golden, though. We saw Xavier Worthy was another player that, just because he ran really quickly, kind of gave that stop, but it was starting to click. My worry is that we never know who is the wide. I think for DFS last year, I gave up on picking Packers wide receivers because I was using a week or two early or behind every single time. Do you see Golden having a solid role in that cloudy Packers wide receiving core?
I don't know. Is the true answer. I'm a Jaden Reed guy. I think he's going to be the kind of target leader in that offense. But look, I just don't know with Matthew Golden. I didn't love the tape. The rookie model doesn't love him. I was kind of below consensus anyway. And then he lands in this spot where, as you said, he's got huge amounts of competition for targets. I think in an ideal world, it kind of makes sense if you've got Romeo Doubs as your X, who's kind of the sacrificial X, runs those downfield routes. You've got Matthew Golden, who's your flanker, who can be that deep threat, but also on those crossing routes and drags and things. And then you've got Jaden Reed out the slot, who's your kind of gadget piece, movable chess piece player. It makes sense in theory. I just don't know if I love it. I probably quite like it as an NFL pick, because I can see the appeal. I think speed kills, and that ability to draw attention and kind of force that second safety out of the box. But from a fantasy perspective, I worry that there's never going to be. It's going to be one of those weeks, as you said, with Packers wide receivers where you're tearing your hair out. But I think Matthew Golden's just going to be that type of player. I think he's similar to Christian Watson, where the highs are high, the lows are incredibly low, and you never know which week to put him in your lineup and which week you should sat on your bench. He's the perfect better and best ball type prospect. But that being said, at this point in the draft, I think it's the right type of pick in terms of shooting for upside and chasing that potential.
Which way are you turning next?
So I'm going to go. I'll grab the other quarterback. Let's go Tyler Shuck. I think that I'd have had him in this same spot a month ago before Derek Carr retired. I think now Derek Carr's retired, it hasn't changed anything. I think Spencer Rattler's probably going to start at the beginning of the season. Week 5, week 6, we'll probably see Tyler Shuck thrown in. I think he's an average prospect. I think he's, I compare his potential to someone like Davis Mills, where he's going to be a reliable starter for a couple of years. He's not going to win many games, but he'll keep the Saints respectable as a franchise until they can draft their future and their kind of heir apparent.
Yeah, the Derek Carr news makes they'll have had an idea this was in the pipeline, and that doesn't come as a surprise to the Saints whatsoever. So that makes a little bit more sense now. It's just interesting that when you say the other quarterback, it's Tyler Shuck, it's the obvious choice rather than more famous names, shall we say, that we might talk about towards the very end of the draft. But yeah, that's a landing spot that's worked out well for him. He's certainly going to have the opportunity, isn't he? I'm going to go for the player that I was considering when I went for Matthew Golden, and that is Cam Skattebo. I found him a player that I really enjoyed watching pre-draft. No, he isn't. The reason we're picking out here is because he isn't one of the strongest of this crop of running backs, but is an enjoyable player to watch. Is a player that certainly, when you hear him talk about himself, he is a confident young man, and his story is going to be successful. And is landing in a Giants offense that is going to have the opportunity, isn't he? He's going to have the opportunity to kind of make that role his own. Yes, he's got competition as well, but I see Skattebo as potentially being a useful fancy running back and a player that here could prove a value, could probably prove to be about right as well. But I don't see him having such a low floor as some of the last few running backs that you might be thinking about at this stage. What are you thinking for Skattebo as a New York Giant?
Yeah, I think he's it's rare that you get someone that's got his running style and, he's not massive, but he's a bigger back and the receiving ability. That's a rare combination that's normally fantasy gold because he sees those high value touches around the goal line and on third downs and on his passing down. So yeah, it's a great mix of talent and potential. As you said, the Giants, I'm a bit of a Tyron Tracy believer, but spending round 4 pick, maybe it hints that they don't believe in Tracy as much as I do. And this is a guy that could absolutely take over that backfield and, be that 60-70% opportunity share guy as a rookie. So I think it makes sense. We're shooting for upside once you get into the second round, and Skattebo certainly got that.
Next up.
So I'm going to go with Harold Fannin. I would normally take him. I'd be comfortable taking him probably 4 or 5 picks earlier. But I know that the ADP and things like that have him going in the 3rd round, so I can afford to let him fall a little bit. This guy's an absolute freak in terms of the potential and the production that he had in college. This is a guy that, quite frankly, broke my rookie model at the tight end position. Yes, he's got one of the strangest running styles in the league. Yes, he ran a 4.7 40, which is concerning, but good draft capital, good landing spot. It's an offense that we know is going to utilize 2 tight ends. He could be, the starting slot receiver on day one. And I think that if we're talking upside and chasing potential, which I feel like I'm repeating myself with every one of these picks, but to me, that's what you should be doing in the second round in fantasy drafts, shooting for the moon, shooting for upside. And Harold Fannin's got overall tight end one potential. So yeah, I'm very intrigued.
I'm going to once again be factoring in the tight end premium. Also, the fact this is going to look beautiful on our draft board as well. And I always like when I'm given the opportunity to pick up someone who is, I said a couple of weeks ago, becoming a my guy. I think he is firmly in the my guy category now, and that is Mason Taylor, a player that I've just has grown more and more on me through the off-season process. Is a player that landing at the Jets, yes, Fields gives me a bit of cause for concern, but is he going to be that security that that Fields needs in that offense? I think he's one of the few tight ends that is, well, this is the last of them probably, that's walking into a guaranteed role day one as well. Yes, Fanning's got a joke there, but as you say, a different system. Mason Taylor, if he'd landed behind someone, I'd have still been looking at later in the draft for a future pickup. But to slot straight in, I think elevates him a little bit. As a Jets fan, Rich, are you excited for Mason Taylor and Justin Fields combination? And what do you think the outlook is for fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have been happier as a pure Jets fan. I posted on Twitter, I think about 2 weeks before the draft. My dream scenario was Membu and then Mason Taylor in the second. And yeah, that's exactly what happened. So I was cock a hoot. I think that he walks in as a prototypical tight end. I think he's going to be more slot heavy than your kind of traditional Y, but I think he's competent enough to hold up in the blocking game. I think there's a chance he could be the number 2 wide receiver on the Jets in terms of target volume. He's certainly not seeing any competition from Kenny Yeboah and Jeremy Ruckert. So I'm very much a big fan of him as a prospect, but also the landing spot and the potential volume that he could see.
Your penultimate pick?
So let's go Carl Williams. It feels like, the film guys love him, the stats guys less so, but this is a guy that I really, really enjoy. I've got him in a tier with Trey Harris and Matthew Golden. That's how highly I kind of think of him. The landing spot is absolutely incredible. I think he's an outside receiver that's got some potential to move inside as well. He's going to be Drake May's best mate for the next 5 years. Yes, it might take a little bit of time. I think he's going to learn behind Stephon Diggs, but he could be amazing, and he's certainly fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a player that, I'll be completely honest, wasn't as on my radar as other wide receivers that perhaps were tipped to go around here, but the landing spot for him has certainly put him on there. And you're right, Drake May, I think, has had an excellent offseason so far with what's been put around him. And Carl Williams is going to be a really important part for him kicking on in his sophomore season and seeing success as well. I'm and ahhing between 2 players again now to finish up with my final pick. So I think I'm going to go for Bashal Tutin for my pick. I think the fact that he's been drafted in round 4 shows that, no, that's not amazing draft capital, but it's enough to have ETN and Bigsby worried. They've not done enough. I remember Ed and I were very bullish on thinking ETN could get it back on track last year. Other much wiser people were quite negative against that. I think your colleague Tom was very much kind of anti ETN, is proven to be correct. I think Tutin walks to a situation where he has a route to making that role his own in a Jags offense that are quite likely going from strength to strength as well. What do you see the outlook for Tutin? Do you see him having a clear run at that, or are there too many question marks around him?
I think the appeal is there. We're getting Liam Cohen, who took one of the worst running games in Tampa Bay and turned it into one of the best last year. I think he's got a little bit more of a tall order given the offensive line struggles in Jacksonville. But yeah, if you told me that Tutin's the lead back in Jacksonville, I'd be very, very interested at this price. I'm perhaps a little bit more of a believer in Tank Bigsby than I think most people are. I think he's got the potential to be the lead back, and Tutin's kind of the explosive complement. I wouldn't be shocked if Travis Etienne gets cut before we get out of training camp, to be honest. So yeah, I think at this point in the draft, we're taking shots, if we're looking for upside, it makes sense there.
Final pick then, bring us home at the end of round 2.
Let's go for the ultimate upside. Jalen Milroe. I think this guy's got the potential to be the overall 101 in startups in 4 years' time. Like the rushing ability, the ability to push the ball downfield, the arm talent, it's all there. I think he needs to speed up his mechanics. I think he needs to speed up his processing ability and just get comfortable in NFL offense. Do I think that happens? No. Do I think it's likely? No. I think the chances are he's probably never going to start more than 4 games, more so than be the kind of overall number 1 pick. But look, as I said earlier, once we get into the second round, I'm shooting for upside. This guy's got the higher upside than anyone in the last probably 3 drafts combined. So yeah, I've got to grab him here as the last pick in the second round.
Yeah, completely agree. There's not a very good chance, but there is a chance. And I said earlier, Jackson Dart is potentially a really good stash for your taxi squad. Milroe is the taxi squad stash that you could change your dynasty roster in a couple of years. Before we have a look at some potential round 3 targets, then, if you are not already, please do get yourself signed up for the TH Fantasy World Best Ball Bonanza 2025. Raising money once again for the Beast of Memory Cafe, an amazing local charity supporting those living with dementia and their carers. We're about 120 plus people signed up now. We are just on our way to £1,500 and approaching £6,000 all time. So a huge thank you to everyone who is involved in that. And if you are not signed up yet, please do so. Round 3 then, Rich. We're not going to go through whole round 3, but let's have a think of a couple of players that you would be considering around round 3. And for some people that may still be watching that are starting to run out of names they know to target, as I think I've seen in a few drafts recently, we get to round 3 and people aren't quite sure who they're going for. Who are some players that you would suggest people keep an eye out for at this stage of their rookie drafts?
Yes, I think Terence Ferguson's probably the first one to name. Anytime Sean McVay takes any sort of wide receiver, I'm very intrigued. He's been talking him up since the draft. Athletic freak, shows some great ability with the ball in his hands. I think the Rams are going to lean more 2 tight end sets. I think Terence Ferguson's potentially the Cooper Kupp replacement in this offense. I think if we're talking, ceiling outcomes, Terence Ferguson could be an elite dynasty tight end, and you're able to potentially scoop him up in the 3rd round of draft. That's pretty intriguing.
Yep, I think it's another player that I would be watching at this point is tight end Elijah Arroyo as well. Love the player and the potential situation as well. Depends how that fits alongside Noah Fant, when and if he will be Noah Fant's replacement, but especially tight end premium, he's someone that piques my interest somewhat. Anybody else you'd be looking for maybe a bit later in round 3, Rich?
Yeah, so at this point, I tend to start shifting more towards what I call the volume-based positions. So that's running back and quarterback. I'm basically looking for a guy that if he gets the potential to start, even if it's for 2 games, 3 games, I can sell him for a profit. So I'm hopefully turning my 2025 3rd or 4th round picks into a 2026 second is basically the dream scenario for me. So I'd be looking at someone like Woody Marks here. Really interesting receiving profile coming out of college, lands with the Texans that have only really got Joe Mixon ahead of him. Joe Mixon getting up there in age, could be 1 injury away from a lead back role, but has also got the potential to see the field on kind of passing downs and show that potential. So yeah, Woody Marks is definitely a running back that I'm intrigued by at this point.
And final thing I would like to ask you, Rich, at what point and how deep does your rookie draft have to be for you to pick up Shedeur Sanders?
Oh, I'd probably take him early 3rd round.
Yeah.
I've got him. He's my 28th overall player. So what's that? 304.
Okay.
Yeah, look, I feel like I've said this 100 times and I keep repeating myself, but we're looking for upside. This is a guy that, some people believed has got the talent to be a top 3 pick in the NFL draft. If he's landed on a Browns roster that don't have a starting quarterback, I think if you were taking bets for who's going to start the most games under center for the Browns, personally, I'd put my money on Shedeur Sanders this year. If you can get a starting quarterback in the third round of a rookie draft, that's absolute found money. So yeah, I'd be happy to take the risk there. And worst case scenario, he sits in your taxi squad for a year and then you drop him. Well, that's what you do with most of your third and fourth round rookie picks, I'm afraid.
Magnificent. Well, thank you very much for joining us yet again, Rich. Always an absolute pleasure to have you on and to make us feel smarter about our rookie drafts as well. If people would like to consume some more of your excellent content, where should they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on, as you said, on Twitter X at Dynasty Island. You can find all of the majority of my work over at the Fantasy Sanctuary, which is at the FF Sanctuary on Twitter and on YouTube.
So do make sure you give us a subscribe here. Go and find the Fantasy Sanctuary as well and get yourself involved with that rookie guide. Definitely, you will not regret it. It will make you far more prepared for your drafts and some wonderful little nuggets in there so you know why you're choosing some players later on and then topping up your roster and your taxi squads post-rookie draft as well. Well said, Rich. Always an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on once again. I think all that remains to be said is shoot for upside. Landing spot doesn't always matter. But for now, Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to Pestle and Ed of TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Instagram and Twitter.